Almost everyone agrees that the housing system in the UK is a mess. Renting is expensive, often damp and insecure, and getting on the property ladder is harder than ever. But there are some exceptions. The chairman of NatWest doesn't think the system is a mess, and he said this to the BBC this morning.
When do you think it's going to be easier for people to get on the property ladder in this country?
Well, I don't think it's that difficult at the moment, but
to buy a house in this country? Are we living in the same country, or are you reporting from overseas?
You have to save, and that's the way it always used to be. We went through
yes, but the multiple of average earnings that you require. Sorry to interrupt. The multiple of average earnings you require to get a house. I mean, I'm just thinking if our listeners under the age of 40 would say, "Have you tried buying a house in a major city in this country?"
Yes, undoubtedly. But what we saw in the financial crisis was the risk of having people being able to borrow 100% in order to get onto the property ladder, and then suffering severe falls in the equity value of their houses and having to leave and having a bad credit record, etc. So there were dangers in very, very easy access to mortgage credit. So I totally recognize that there are people who find it very difficult to start the process. They will have to save more, but that is, I think, inherent in the change in the financial system as a result of the mistakes that were made in the last global financial crisis. And we have to accept we're still living with that.
So the chairman did accept that deposits on houses are higher than they used to be, but he says it was necessary to move away from 95% or 100% mortgages so we have a stable financial system. We are just being sensible after the mistakes made around, or in the run-up, I suppose, to 2007, 2008, the financial crisis. What he misses, though, is this. The reason deposits are astronomical isn't because lending has got tighter, but rather because house prices have rocketed, right? A 10% deposit on a house worth 100 grand was much smaller than a 10% deposit on the same house now when it's worth $500,000. A chart from the BBC made the point well. So since the year 2000, house prices have gone up by 240%. Nominal earnings have only gone up by 112%. That means the real cost of a house is double what it used to be. And that analysis is based on nationwide averages. In big cities, it's much worse. So in Hackney, where I live, house prices have gone up by a factor of 7, by 700%. In 1997, the average house or flat went for £80,000 in Hackney. Now it's £550,000, more than £500,000. In Manchester, house prices have gone up by 481%. In the year 2000, you could buy a house in Manchester for an average price of £40,000. It will now set you back £240,000. Aaron, what was the NatWest chairman thinking? Right, you can only talk in the language of credit. You might get bad credit rating. He's sort of ignored the elephant in the room, which is that houses have just increased by an astronomical amount in terms of what they actually cost.
Michael, these people live in a parallel reality. You know, this guy went to Manchester Grammar School. It's not a grammar school. It's a fee-paying school. And then he went to Oxford, and then he worked at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and he worked in banking in the 80s, the 90s. And I think now he plays cricket for Barnes. I don't know if you're watching or listening to this has been to Barnes. If you go to Barnes, you'll understand why he's saying this. Okay? You go, this is gorgeous. It's surreal. We've got the planes going to Heathrow, but apart from that, it's idyllic. And so I can understand, Stanley Tucci lives there. So if you live in Stanley Tucci land and you're buying your little £4 punnet of organic Isle of Wight tomatoes from Barnes Farmers Market every weekend, I can see why you think the economy's hunky-dory. Let me read some stats to you, Michael, about this. People in the late 30s and early 40s, which should, by the way, be the backbone of the labour market, are now 3 times more likely to rent than 20 years ago. Not 50% more likely, 3 times more likely. In 1990, 60% of 25 to 34-year-olds in the southeast of England were homeowners. So 60% of people, 25 to 34, were homeowners. In the southeast of England today, or by 2017, I should say, that figure has fallen to 30%. So from 60%, it was a majority experience, to 30%. In 1997, the most common living arrangement among 18 to 34-year-olds, and this will really shock you, among 18 to 34-year-olds, was in a couple with 1 or more children. That was the common living the number one most common living experience for people aged 18 to 34 was having their own place and having one or more children. Today, most people in the same age bracket, slightly younger, still live with their parents. That's the most common living condition. So clearly something quite substantial has changed, Michael. If you're saying that people in their late 30s, early 40s are 3 times more likely to rent than 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 20 years ago, quite recently, right? I started university 20 years ago. I'm 39. Maybe you can't tell. It's not that long ago. And now we're saying, nothing's changed. A lot's changed, believe me. Listen to me as somebody who's had to enter the labour market over that period, rather than this gentleman who's probably been dozing after a few pims on Barnes Common after a cricket match. And by the way, people like Howard Davies, who was senior at the London School of Economics, had to leave because they took money from Saif Gaddafi. I think he resigned in 2011 when the student movement obviously emerged. People like him are why the country is screwed. And I know people use that line all the time. This person or that person, that people create enemies all the time, right? You are why the country is screwed. No, people like Howard Davies are why the country is screwed. They're why the country won't be able to solve lots of problems, from energy transition, declining house streets, inequality, birth rates, people can't afford to start families, small businesses, all these problems. They won't be solved as long as there are people like Howard Davies pontificating like this without having the first idea what they're talking about, because they live in their little enclaves, which in no way reflect the broader economic and social conditions of this country. Go to Barnes Farmers Market on a Saturday. I should know. I used to sell tomatoes there, including to Stanley Tucci, and you will know what I'm talking about.